Hey everyone, we are gonna get going. We only have an hour and we have a lot to cover. So I am gonna kick us off and then I'll hand us over to my colleague to get us going. I'm Melissa Cassett. I'm the program manager for the Beacons and Advanced Practice team at the Solutions Journalism Network. I am here to welcome you and sort of set the stage for today's webinar, introduce everyone, and then I will hand things over to my colleague Jaisal, who will be hosting today's session. To get us started, if you'd like to drop your name and where you're from, place, affiliated publication in the chat. I have a few housekeeping items to share, and then I will get us going. We are recording this session. We plan to put it up on our YouTube channel after we're finished, so you can look for things there. If you have any questions during the session, please put them into the chat. We are saving some time at the end, but if your question relates to something we're talking about, we may pop it in as we're going along as well. And we're going to try to get to as many questions as possible. We have a survey that we're going to pop into the chat at the end that we would love for you to answer. We're also going to email it out, but we'd love if you have some time at the end of the webinar to answer our survey. We would love for that. And we'll say it now and we'll say it again. Thank you so much for attending. My colleagues, Angela, Jaisal, Alan Arthur, Linda Shaw, Francine Huff, and many others who worked hard to bring this session together. Really appreciate you being here. So I'm going to set the stage for our webinar as well as introduce you to our host and our panelists. And once I hand things over to my colleague, our host, Jaisal, you can find me in the chat. Our event today, covering immigration through a solutions lens, seeks to discuss how journalists can cover solutions emerging from within immigrant communities that focus on dignity and possibility. It's grown ever clearer that for journalism to be truly valuable to immigrant communities, we must be present for more than just the most difficult moments. How we do that and how we do that well is what we're going to talk about today. Jaisal Noor is he's the democracy cohort manager at SJN, where he supports journalists in reporting on the solutions their communities are creating and pursuing. He's an organizer for US Democracy Day and a member of the 100 Days of Dignity collaboration. Jaisal is based in Baltimore, and his multimedia reporting has been published in Baltimore Beat, the Real News Network, and other independent media outlets. Dianna Náñez is the co-founder and executive editor of Arizona Luminaria, a nonprofit newsroom dedicated to community-driven, in-depth local journalism. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the daughter of Mexican immigrants, Dianna brings 15 years of experience from the Arizona Republic and deep expertise in investigative storytelling, newsroom leadership, and mentorship. She's currently collaborating with ProPublica on a 3-year investigative reporting partnership and was recently selected for New Media Ventures' Latino Voices for Democracy cohort. Hugo Balta is the executive editor of The Fulcrum and a veteran journalist with over 30 years in multimedia news. He's led initiatives at NBC, ABC, CBS, and PBS, and is a 2-time president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Hugo also leads the Latino News Network and is a nationally recognized solutions journalism trainer, championing inclusive reporting on democracy and health equity. In 2024, he received Northwestern's prestigious Cecilia Weisman Award. Shondiin Silversmith is an award-winning journalist from the Navajo Nation who covers Arizona's 22 tribal nations as the Indigenous Affairs reporter for the Arizona Mirror. She spent over 14 years telling stories about Indigenous communities with bylines in both local and national outlets. A dedicated advocate for Indigenous representation in journalism, she holds a master's in journalism from Northeastern and is currently pursuing her PhD at Arizona State University. So I'm going to hand it over to Jaisal to start our conversation.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today, and thank you for our distinguished panelists. It's really an honor to be leading this conversation, as someone that is an immigrant themselves and got into journalism because these stories weren't being told. So, it's really, really grateful to be here and to be steering this conversation. And this conversation is really for you if you've been covering immigration for years or just jumping into this beat. We want you to walk away feeling more confident about using solutions journalism in your reporting. The goal is to move past one-dimensional coverage of immigration and immigrants to tell the whole story, not just what's going wrong, but how communities are responding. And this is just the start. After the webinar, we'll send out key takeaways, resources, and as you heard, a short survey. We really want you to fill that out so we can learn the best way to support this community we're building in this room and beyond. Keep it going forward. And please put your questions in the chat. So we'll start. I'm going to throw some questions out to the panel, and then we'll ask some more specific questions, and we'll take some audience questions. But we can just go around. Whoever wants to unmute, please jump in. So when you hear the phrase covering immigration through a solutions lens, those are things that don't necessarily go together, at least how we traditionally consume the media. That's not normally two things that go together. Can you talk about what that means for you? And we can, whoever wants to jump off mute, feel free.
We'll jump off mute. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it, and really inspired to see so many people in this conversation. I know these are tough times for many different reasons, and particularly in reporting on these issues right now. So it just brings me a lot of joy, and moments of joy are important to recognize. So first that. So for me personally, my grandparents were immigrants from Mexico. I grew up and was born in a little tiny 5,000 population migrant farm working town in Northern California. And I say this when I start these conversations because I think it's important, as Jaisal said, even myself as an immigrant, like this was important for me to figure out how to tell these stories in a dignified, truthful way. And growing up in the fields and having the privilege to play while all my family picked crops in pesticide-laden fields. Many of my family members suffered from that, and watching them be treated as the mayordomos, the people that were the bosses that were saying, fill the bins, I'd see them treat their dog better than they would treat my loved ones. And my loved ones and my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother and father, like superheroes to me, right? You're a little kid. And I remember thinking at the time that if my family could be treated like this, there must be many other communities of people that could be treated like this. And I could see my own family build what they called a concilio. El concilio is a precursor to UFW farm workers. And in that, all the farm workers got together and they would meet and they would discuss the issues of the community, and they would discuss the issues of who needed help because they were ill, because there was no insurance, and they would collect pot of money. They would have celebrations in tough times too, to honor each other. They would help pay for funerals and weddings. And this was a system that they created all throughout this migrant farm working community, right? And so I often tell that story because that is the voices in the community and the actual truthful life. Because if you walk in and you tell a story about farm workers, you often see stories that say these poor people who are just here maybe on a HB visa or are here undocumented and working in 110-degree weather sometimes, picking crops. And yes, those things are true. Workers' rights, violations of workers' rights, those things are true and they should be in their solution story. But you cannot have a truthful story if you don't show the dignity of the people and how they're working outside of systems that don't support them, maybe are racist and certainly are inequitable, but how their voices are being heard, how they're working together. And I think for me, that's the core of solutions journalism, is that if you're not really spending time to understand and you walk into an area, you walk into a migrant community and all you do is tell the problems, then you certainly haven't told the truth of what people are actually doing to survive and to support each other and to love one another and honor each other.
Thank you. Shondiin or Hugo?
Thank you for that, Diana. And again, to reiterate what Diana said, thank you very much for this opportunity. I think a lot of what Diana mentioned resonates with me. I'm the son of Peruvian immigrants, and I am certainly the son of Hugo and Graciela Balta, which when I think about who I am personally and professionally, it's been influenced a lot by bearing witness to my parents sifting through their adoptive country, especially in my formidable young years. But their story of the late 60s, early 70s is as true, was true then as it is today, meaning it repeats itself. And for me, solutions journalism is about putting a face and a voice to a lot of the challenges that the immigrant community faces, which too often is absent, right? Especially in the last couple of months with all of the executive orders and the incessant topics around immigration. There's been a lot, of course, conversation about immigration reform and the challenges, but we seldom see and hear, let alone listen from this community. And for me, solutions journalism is that. It is listening that results in more in-depth, authentic stories about the people behind the numbers that are so often waved by both conservatives and liberals in regards to immigration. And I think that's very important because as we continue to wrestle with this issue of a broken immigration system, it is important to remember that there are people, real people, that are struggling, the most vulnerable people that are struggling, they are behind those numbers. And solutions journalism allows me to tell, to provide a narrative that looks at a negative and seeks to put a positive. It isn't to sugarcoat the issues that we're facing, but it's really to not stop short of just shining a light to a problem, but start really digging in and having important conversations and debate about the responses to the solutions to those problems.
Not just what's wrong, but what's possible and what should be, perhaps. Shondiin.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I I have always deeply admired Diana and the work that she does because of how well she is able to do what those qualities of solution journalism that Hugo pointed out is being able to pull people in to these topics and into these discussions by showing the humanity behind it. Because it's important to be able to not only tell this story, but give these people the chance to share their stories. I think that's one of the biggest differences for a lot of people who come from underrepresented communities, especially journalists who actively work to tell stories about these communities. They are actively working to help these individuals share their stories. We're not trying to just tell stories about them or trying to shed light on these communities. We want to help uplift them. And I think that's kind of a primary goal for a lot of people when it comes to solutions journalism, especially for me as an Indigenous journalist who works within my own community, but also covering the tribes in Arizona and tribes that live along the border. But these are issues that we face differently compared to immigrant families and people who come to this country seeking to a better land. And the way that a lot of especially Indigenous people see it is like, you can't be an immigrant on stolen land. So when you look at it in these different perspectives and you see how these stories are being told and how these policies are impacting people, being able to share their perspectives is important. because it humanizes it. When you lose that humanity of storytelling, then you're just listing facts and statistics, and that doesn't help anybody. So
Thank you so much. Now, we promised the audience that we will have, we want you to take away what you need to start doing solutions reporting or do deeper solutions reporting if you haven't already been doing solutions reporting, or if you've started but want, tips on how to go deeper. So the next question for all of you is, can you share some examples of the kinds of stories or frameworks that can help reporters get started or can help reporters that are already doing solutions to go deeper into these issues? And Dianna, we'll go to you since you were the first to speak.
Tips to how to dig into this, correct?
Yes. Where to start?
Yeah. So I think one of the things we discussed in a pre-conversation, and Ugo made a good point about this, was that yes, you want to aim for the context of, the insight, limitations, hitting the 4 pillars. And I think that should definitely be the goal, because what that does is it gives you the framework for a contextualized, deeper story. And that doesn't mean a 3,000 word story. It could be a 800-word story with those ingredients. And I think when you hit those ingredients, even if they're in a cursory way, it hits at the humanity. It hits at the contextualization of whether that's historical or current contextualizing. It hits at the limitations of there's never, the cure pill, even if we wish there was. And I think that should be a mindset. Like, that's a tip in itself. Like, oh, I'm really busy. Oh, I don't have a lot of time for the story. But if you say, okay, I don't, but I still want to put these 4 elements in because that's the ethical way to do this type of migration, immigration, borderlands journalism, right? Then if you only hit 3, it's okay. Like, you aim for 4, you hit 3. You hit 4, but you hit them in a cursory way. Guess what? That's your first step to the second or third in-depth story, because you did the first one. It allows you to do the digging and the reporting for the more in-depth one that will actually hit the 4 pillars in a deeper way. So I think just the mindset first. I also tell people, because there's a lot of people who are like, well, what solutions and positive and blah, blah, blah. I think one of the ways, the tips for me, myself, I was not I didn't understand solutions journalism, and I thought it was a positive way. And that irked me because of the fact that I am among communities that have been marginalized, have dealt with racism, both outright and systemically. And I don't want you to put a positive spin on racism. I don't want you to put a positive spin on pesticides in the fields that they knew would kill farm workers, right? What I didn't understand is that that was actually the depth of reporting that I already always tried to bring. Once I got my foot in the door of a newsroom, was able to be like, all right, here you go. That was that depth. That solutions was, you can't have a solution without a problem. So when you're struggling and you're saying, how can I put a solutions positive light on this? Remember that the solution exists from a community level, because they're dealing with a problem or a challenge in their community. And they're trying to face it, and they're trying to usually face it within their own community. They're trying to advocate for civic leaders, for community leaders, for national leaders, for city leaders to make change at the same time. So I think that mindset would be my biggest tip first, to get out of like the pillar mindset, but to get into the reporting and like the depth of reporting that you want to do and the caring of reporting that you want to do. And you will almost always find, when you come from that mindset, you're going to almost intentionally hit those pillars without even thinking of like, oh, let me cross them off my list.
For me, it's about not thinking about the 4 pillars in solutions journalism when you start to write the story. How I absorbed solutions journalism was changing the way I thought and organized my work as a journalist, but also changing the culture in our newsrooms. If we use the 4 pillars in how we're researching, in how we're pitching stories and how we're producing those stories, that then creates a culture of really starting to think about what is the response to this challenge. And lately I've been thinking, because of spending time in working with different marginalized communities, the framing of positive and negative, right? So it isn't to produce a story that's necessarily about something that's working or that it is a solution to the problem. It is about the response. And the four pillars helps us unpack that. And the conclusion can be positive, or it could be it fell short. So the positivity of solutions journalism is that it goes beyond, again, spotlighting a problem, which there's too much of in mainstream media, and not enough about, well, what's being done about it. That's the positive part of it. The focusing on what's the work being done to solve this problem. But of late, and in talking to and listening to members of the community, they don't see often that they have a problem. They see that they're realizing an opportunity. It is outside of the community that sees a problem or a challenge that needs to be fixed. But when you when you're with them, they're talking about how they are lifting themselves up and locking arms in realizing an opportunity. So narrative is so important. And perspective. And that's what I love about solutions journalism, that it questions my own biases, especially if I'm covering a story about a community that is not my own or foreign to me, or I've had little interaction. By applying the four pillars, it really helps me see a lot of blind spots that I'm not aware of, and helps me strive to produce stories that are authentic and in depth. And in doing so, and in really unwrapping those responses, it also helps me to fulfill one of the tenements of being a journalist, and that's holding the powerful accountable.
Thank you so much, Shondiin.
So I often, I think, encounter this, especially because I am also, like, I also am a teacher of journalism, and I have students who often come with me with these grand ideas and these grand story ideas and these problems that they identify that they've never heard of, or they're so new. But I often need to remind people that problems or issues that are often spotlighted within journalism or media today, communities have already known about. People from these communities have already known about these issues, or have already tried to find their own solutions, or are actively working for their own solutions of these problems or these issues. You have grassroots advocates that actively work within their communities to try and help uplift their own communities. And oftentimes within marginalized communities, it's these people who are responsible for providing these solutions. Or making these solutions more noticeable for state policies or federal policies, or bringing these issues to light. So I think when it comes to covering marginalized communities and people who are often underrepresented, sorry, underrepresented in what is considered mainstream media, you have to understand that they've been dealing with these for generations. It's something that they have grown up with. It's something that has been a part of not only their life, but their parents' life, their grandparents' life. These are issues that they have been dealing with on a generational basis, and every generation has responded to them differently. So when you are looking to tell stories about this in today's age, in this generation's, you can't do that properly without looking to what their family has done before, or with what has happened before. So I think that's something that a lot of journalists may miss, because we all work on deadline. We all work on trying to make sure we're meeting our quotas. And I feel like that's just the way the journalism industry is set up. But what makes solution journalism so beneficial for reporters today is it gives you that opportunity to take a step back to look at these problems in that type of way. It makes you pause before diving headfirst and realizing, like, oh, this has been done before. There are people who have actively worked in this community trying to address this for a really long time. Why have I never known about this? But they've known about it for generations. So yeah.
Wondering if I can pop in here with a question from somebody in our audience here who asked, Michelle asked, many of us here are either themselves immigrants or grew up watching prior generations be discriminated against. We are ourselves experts. What can we do collectively to fill in the coverage gaps? For example, what if we started a collective Substack to tell our stories and suggest ideas for coverage? Otherwise, we're stuck with op-ed writing if we can't persuade an assignment editor to carry out our coverage.
Well, this is a great panel to ask about this, because this is the work that they have been doing for years.
I think that's an excellent idea, the Substack, and I think it's also a point of frustration, right? Especially if you're in a newsroom where you're a minority, meaning you're either the only person of that particular of the particular group that you represent, that you're a part of, or one of a small group of marginalized members of the newsroom. So it could be frustrating to pitch stories that the establishment just doesn't understand, and their perspective is always viewing those types of stories as the other, right? And not necessarily as what they truly are, which is part of the community. I think it's important to create safe places, to have conversations before having the conversation. As someone who shares in some of the frustration that I am hearing, and I'm sure I'm projecting, I started to feel deflated because of just always hearing no, or I don't know, hitting that brick wall. I started to engage one-on-one with people, and that then turned into larger groups, so that I could create safe spaces to first let people know how I felt in those situations where it wasn't just frustration, but isolation, and looking at from a different lens, the newsroom, and mandate of serving all communities. And in those situations that wasn't high pressured, like editorial meetings can be where you're pitching stories, in a situation that was much more about less pressured, more reflection, and looking for understanding, not just them understanding me, but vice versa, then I started to penetrate a little bit more than in the arena of that in newsroom of pitching stories. And one-on-one conversations turned into larger conversations, so that when I was in the situation of pitching stories, I had a lot of supporters, right? Allies. And that really helped me be much more successful in pitching those types of stories. I also think that these are conversations that we should be having in newsrooms, independent of when we're pitching stories, aside from those one-on-one safe spaces, but larger conversations about the mission of newsroom. You know, I often worked in newsrooms where if I would just pick 5, 10 people in a newsroom and ask them, what's our mission? What do we do here? What's our goal? I'd get 5, 10 different answers. And some of those answers were, I don't know. So it's really important to push back with leadership and say, we need to have conversations periodically about our mission and who we are and how the stories that we're producing reinforce that mission and our commitment to communities, because those are the conversations, again, in a less pressured situation, when we can have conversations about making sure that all voices and faces and stories of the communities that we're covering are reflected in the stories that we're publishing and producing across all platforms.
I'll add to the idea of, if you're a member of a community and you don't feel that the ideas that you're bringing to the table in your newsroom or across your newsrooms are not being heard and being said, I'm not sure that's a story. Maybe dig some more into that, right? And you feel like you're screaming inside because you're like, oh my God, I literally talked to like 100 people from this community. They're telling me, why aren't you guys telling this story? And you're telling it wrong. And I think for solutions journalism, it's interesting because it's almost like response, insight, evidence, limitations, right? Like it's basic research core. You want to throw accuracy in there, and you've got the elements of like, why wouldn't you want to tell a story that's insightful, that has depth and responses from people that are actually living this, right? Like, so you can use some of that language to say that. But I think the reality of this is that if you're hitting that wall, the couple of the best things, Shondiin and I worked together at the Arizona Republic for a time, and there we had a committee that was an equity, inclusion, diversity type committee. And there was usually about 15 to 20 journalists on that committee, and it provided agency and also a safe space for people to talk about the storytelling and then come together so that you're not just one person talking to an editor who, it could be scary. You could be worried about, well, when layoff times, am I going to be on that list because I was the one that was complaining or pushing back? So it gives you a framework. So I would say if you have a large enough newsroom to, it doesn't even have to be a formal committee, but come together, go out and have lunch, talk about how you guys can have a larger conversation with your editorial management about, we feel that we need to do a better job of making sure that these story ideas about immigration, that we're living, and that we're more held accountable because we're the ones that go home. And we're the ones that live in this community, and we're the ones being yelled at and being like, why there's no trust between where you work in our community. And I think that's the reality, that they need to hear that. And I also think one of the best tools that we had is inviting the very communities in, usually 5 to 6 people, 4 to 6 people from these actual communities. We did this with Dreamers, we did it with Undocumented, we did it with, because there's no group is a monolith, even migration communities. And then think about the different languages of migrant communities and the urban versus rural. So wherever you are, I would say, if that's what you're facing, fastest way to help people understand is, because most journalists do care. They just may not have those experiences that people that have grown up with being an immigrant or grown up with family who are immigrants. The best thing you can do is bring those people to the table, invite the entire newsroom, especially the editors, have a panel like this, ask questions, but mostly have people from that community say, here's what I think you guys are doing great, and I hope to see more of this. And quite honestly, here's what I think you guys are not telling, and it's actually inaccurate and not truthful. I can't tell you the change that I've seen. You could be telling an editor and asking an editor and bringing the idea and going and dig. Then as soon as they heard from the people of their community, it was like this light would flash. So I would encourage you and invite you, like if you're having those struggles right now, get that panel, talk to some community members that can actually speak to your editors, and invite the entire newsroom and make sure that your leadership is there. I want to throw this to Shondiin, because when Shondiin started in the newsroom, she was one of the few Indigenous people there, and there was no such thing as an Indigenous communities or Indigenous affairs beat at the Arizona Republic, even though there were 2 22 federally recognized tribes in the Navajo Nation, which is one of the largest indigenous sovereign nations in the US. And so I think that speaks to this feeling of like, how do you have conversations with editorial? And now imagine like, if you worked in a newsroom and there wasn't even immigration or migration or borderlands like focus.
Burn it all to the ground. No, I'm just kidding. So I well, so one of the things, especially because now I have a lot more experience in my field, and I have come to realize that I am a quality journalist and an expert in my field. And trust me, it takes a long time for someone who comes from a community that doesn't get news coverage as often as anybody else to actually realize, like, holy crap, these stories are actually valuable, because I grew up on the Navajo Nation and I relied on tribal newspapers and was surrounded by my people all the time and surrounded by my culture all the time, and had people actively talking about me as an indigenous person like it mattered. But as soon as you step off the Navajo Nation, or you step away from communities who are aware of indigenous people and aware of tribal nations, that doesn't exist. And it's frustrating, it's disheartening, and frankly, it pisses me off, because I had to constantly fight with not only other journalist professors of color or other journalists, and throughout this, and as soon as I left the Navajo Nation and went out into this society of journalism and what consists of mainstream journalism, it has been a constant uphill battle to be like, these stories matter. And I don't think any underrepresented community or any community of color should have to fight that hard. They shouldn't have to fight to justify why their stories matter, or why people from these communities should be able to tell their stories. When I started working at the Arizona Republic, I met Dianna because she already knew my work as at the tribal level, and it surprised me because she instantly became that person where I felt comfortable at least knowing that she understood what tribes were, and she understood who indigenous people are, and I didn't have to educate her on that. So when you enter these newsrooms and you enter these spaces, when you find somebody and you find an individual who is willing to listen, but also is willing to understand and help you not have to be that educator, or they don't have to have you keep justifying why you should be able to tell these stories, then they understand what you're trying to do. So when I started working at the Arizona Republic, I noticed that they did not have an Indigenous Affairs reporter, and they are the state's they are the state newspaper, and Arizona is home to 22 tribal nations, but also they have the third largest indigenous population in the country. That includes people from most likely all 574 tribes across the country. So when you think about this as a newsroom, how can you claim that you are serving the people when you are actively ignoring a demographic of people? When you are actively not trying to cover a demographic of people? That does not only do a disservice to them, it does a disservice to journalism. And I think being there, like I've always, and like being in newsrooms that don't focus on coverage for people of color or focus on coverage about underrepresented communities, it was really because I had someone like Dianna, and I had other people who weren't newsroom leaders, but other journalists of color or other or other allies within the newsroom that understood why it was important and helped me share that message is why that beat was able to get started in the first place. So I think it's not easy and it's not something that's going to be fast, but I think the only thing that honestly kept me going was knowing that there were people like Dianna that helped me get there. So yeah.
So the answer is get a coworker like Dianna.
Yes. Find another Dianna.
Find your
So
people.
yeah,
Find your people. That's the answer. And then
Yeah.
bring your communities, bring your indigenous communities, bring your migrant communities, bring your dreamer communities into the newsroom and let them speak to the journalists and the editors and everybody across the way and share their experiences and what they want coverage about their communities and about them themselves to look like. And it is powerful. And we probably should all be doing it. So maybe we'll all walk away from this and start organizing that, hopefully in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. And yes, please, thank you for the questions. And we're seeing some come in. The rest of our time, we really want to spend on your questions. So we'll start with Keelan. So it's a question about balancing solutions reporting while you're also doing breaking news. And we know the challenges of doing both. I will say we have a great resource for that. So we'll link to that, but we'll get a response from the panelists. And my final question for the panelists is sort of related to this. It's something that came out of our conversation before this last week was what are some, so along with breaking stories and solution stories, what are some quick turnaround solution stories you can do? And what are some longer term solution stories that you can be working on as well? And I'll open it up to whoever wants to take this first.
Well, I'll jump in. I think whether it's, I mean, it really applies to every story, right? Not just immigration. And I think one of the things that Shondiin mentioned, which definitely resonates with me, is too often newsrooms are fixated on what's happening right now, and that's really important. But there needs to be more focus on how do we get here, right? Because a lot of times, especially when we're talking about societal issues, it isn't about like, it manifested itself all of a sudden. The challenges that especially marginalized communities face today is because of something that Dianna mentioned earlier. It's years and years of historic barriers being placed on these communities, and um, and so the challenges, the hurdles that they have today has a lot to do with what the systemic racism and other barriers that were put into place 50 years in the making, if not more. So similarly, when we're in newsrooms, absolutely cover the story of the day, provide some depth if you can. I know that there's a lot of time constraints. Of course, my background is in broadcast television, and whether it's television, radio, newspapers, digital, it's a race against the clock. Some deadlines are within that day, so you're always racing. But it shouldn't just end there. Too many times, especially spot news stories, their lifespan is just that once they're published or once they go on the air, and then it's something that was so important that day that required resources to produce. Sometimes team coverage the next day or the next week, it's just like it never happened. So I think it's really important to focus on what's happening today, provide some depth, but follow up, right? Immigration it is not just in the first 100 days of the Trump administration, although there's a lot to talk about in the first 100 days, but it's also before. And so this is a conversation we're going to be having not for the next year, for the next 4 years and beyond. Make sure you're always going back to that story that you're focused today and add to it, add those layers. Maybe you couldn't focus on the response because it's spot news, but those are the stories that you should be pitching. Then you can focus on the response and you can focus on the other pillars, and you're providing greater depth over time of a societal issue. And you're also building a relationship with those communities and in a commitment to the coverage that resonates to all of your audiences and not just the one that you're focusing on. So it's about figuratively thinking. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. Go back to the story, the news of the day, go back to it again and again. And that also provides greater depth as well as looking what got us here.
Greater depth and you mentioned building relationships with the communities, building relationships with sources, right? Getting powerful scenes, getting powerful anecdotes, getting those stories you hear when the recorder turns off, right? That's where the magic really happens. Dianna, I saw you were
Yeah.
ready to speak.
Thank you. Well, that was very helpful because I think broadcast feels it in ways that, and I mean, broadcast lives on breaking, right? And so how do you find the breathers in between? Um, so when I attend panels and I'm like, give me the thing I can use, right? Like conversations are important and they sometimes can inspire me or make me think in different ways, but then I need to leave with like the thing that I can use. So I hope I can offer this specifically is that when you work in breaking or when you have to pitch the daily story because you're required to have a daily story, I'm going to say like a daily story is say that there is a raid at a particular business as they've been happening across the nation, right? Bunch of people are swept up. That's the daily story, right? Get out there, go talk to the officials that are there, see if you can talk to anybody as they're being talked to the business people, talk to the community around there. And there's your daily story, right? But as Hugo says, stick around, stay around. So clearly there is next to that business another business. Figure out what happened, who's here, figure out the families, go back and talk to that and figure out the deeper story there. We had something with a family, a mother from Venezuela and her two children were essentially yelled at because she was selling empanadas as like a Circle K convenience store. Got scared. Woman was yelling at her, I'm going to call police. She leaves. She drives away, gets pulled over by ADOT. Border Patrol comes. Our reporters did this as essentially a breaking news story, but then came back and went to the church that they had gone to and spent some time at that church on their Sabbath day and talked to people about the hole that's been left. The family also had the husband and two other older children who had not been picked up, so now they were separated. So there became a deeper story there with that. We're still looking at like, what does it do to a community to have an entire, like, this is 4 children that were going to schools. This is a family that were participating in their church. Like to have someone disappeared essentially and to tell it at that individual level. And now the family the mother was deported to Mexico, which is not her country. Father and the other 2 children are there. And because our reporting team handled this in the breaking and handled it in the more weekly enterprise way and continues to meet and report, we now have a reporter in Mexico meeting with his family right now, trying to talk about and understand at a deeper level that will be more of an in-depth solutions type journalism story of like, how do you manage when your entire family community has been ripped apart and now you're living in Mexico. But I want to give you that arc and that it started as a breaking news story. And then it started as a like weekly type story. And now it's moving to probably be deeper solutions and also series type story.
So I think for one of the things that I always think about when it comes to breaking news or when these stories about the issues that happen right when they happen or these policies that are being passed right when they happen, like, yes, that's the breaking news part, but I think journalists need to remember that those have impacts. That policy is going to have an impact. That executive order is going to have an impact. It's going to have that impact. Like now, you're going to see those impacts now, like with just how I think one of the stories that I did in particular that relates to immigration was about how these raids and these tactics have been increasing so much that it's actually impacted a tribe that never thought it was going to impact them before. And it's impacting them in a way because they're like, it's because we're brown. So now, now we are feeling something that we have never felt before. And we don't know how to deal with that. And we don't know how to protect our people from that, because this is not something that we've had any familiarity with. But the reality is that there are tribes that live along the border that have dealt with immigration issues their entire existence. I mean, the Tohono O'odham tribe is one of only a handful of tribes that lives directly along the border, and they have the capability as a sovereign nation to go back and forth because they have people who live on both sides. But they've had the U.S. Border Patrol within their community for decades that have been impacting their community for decades. So when I wrote that story about how the Navajo Nation was responding, because they've never had citizens be impacted this way because they're based in northern Arizona. So I'm like, but tribes have been dealing with this. So have you contacted southern border tribes? Have you tried talking to them about in terms of how you can do this? So when you see those little connections after the initial breaking news, that's where the solutions journalism comes in. That's where those deeper stories come in. You will be able to find those connections and look beyond just the initial impact of what these policy changes are doing, or what that breaking news aspect is doing in terms of looking for more in-depth coverage. So, and like, I knew the reason why I wanted to do this is like my whole premise for doing that story in the first place is that my son is 17. He's a tall 6'2" brown boy. He's just a really nice dark brown boy, and he got his city bus pass for the first time. And I kept seeing all of these breaking news stories about how across Arizona, how all of these nice brown people were being taken off the bus because of ICE raids and were being stopped at bus stations because of this. And then that literally triggers a fear that I've never felt before in my life. And I know that that's a common fear that people have felt all of their life. So for me, I wanted to be like, I can't be the only one feeling this way as an Indigenous person. So that's why I did that story. And like, that's why I continuously try to find like follow-ups to it. But that was the reason why I did it in the first place, is because my son takes the city bus now. And I had to sit him down and explain to him that you need to make sure you carry your state ID with you, and you need to make sure you carry your CIB with you. I don't know how useful that's going to be, but you have to do that. So yeah, that's just my recommendation.
Fantastic. We are just about out of time, and I know there's some more questions, but I don't think we can get to them in the time we have left, because we want to make sure these questions get answered in a real way. So we'll take those questions and we'll add them to our ongoing list of for this conversation to continue, because these are really important questions. But we don't want to cut these cut the answers short. But I just wanted to say it's it's been a privilege, a real honor to be part of this conversation, to help guide it a little bit. And I just want to thank our panelists and the folks at SJN that helped make this possible. Dianna, Hugo, Shondiin, and Angela and Melissa behind the scenes, and everyone else that made this possible. So we really hope that you, everyone here, people watching the recording, got some really insightful tips. I know I did that I'm going to start, putting into practice. And some tips, some story ideas, just the framework on how to approach stories, whether you're doing breaking news, you're doing longer feature reporting. And as we said, we'll send you the links and resources we mentioned in the follow-up email along with the recording. We'll give you we're going to make a little guide that gives you like the highlights and the key takeaways. And then we're also going to send you a survey because we're already hearing that people want to keep this conversation going and they want to know, if they have questions in the future, where should they go? So we want to know what the best venue for that is. We know Slack can be helpful, but everyone's on a million Slack channels. So we'll figure out like what the best format for that is, depending on what you all are asking for. So again, thank you all for participating. And we know there's so much going on right now, but thank you for taking the time. And we really look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Thank you. And I know some of us can stay on if folks want to chat afterwards, but I wanted to be respectful of everyone's time.